Last week in Istanbul, about 12,000 obesity researchers, endocrinologists, and pharma executives got together for the European Congress on Obesity. 3 days, hundreds of presentations, and 5 studies came out of the conference that are going to change how patients on GLP-1 medications get treated over the next year. Today, I'm going to walk you through all 5 studies in the order they actually matter to you. What happened, why you should care, and what you should do about it, if anything. Let's start with the headline grabbers. I'm Dr. Clete Barrick, dual board certified in internal medicine and obesity medicine. I've treated thousands of patients on GLP-1 medications, peptides, and medical weight loss therapy. This is Straight Shot, the science of weight loss explained by a doctor who lives it. Quick note, everything on this show is for education only. It is not medical advice for your specific situation. Always talk to your prescribing physician before making any changes to your treatment. Welcome to Straight Shot. We'll kick off with Study 1, the Step Up, a higher dose of Wegovy trial. Here's what happened. Wegovy is the brand name for semaglutide for obesity, as you likely well know. The standard top dose has been 2.4 milligrams once a week. At that dose, the average patient loses about 17% of their body weight over a year and change. Novo Nordisk ran a trial called Step Up, which tested a new higher dose, 7.2 milligrams. That's 3 times the standard. The results presented at ECO are now the basis for an FDA approval, and they're quite impressive. On 7.2 milligrams, the average patient lost 20.7% of their body weight at 72 weeks. That's already a meaningful bump over 17.5 on the standard dose. But the more interesting number is the responder analysis. About 1 in 4 patients on 7.2 turned out to be quote-unquote early responders. And those patients hit 27.7% total body weight loss. For context, that's the kind of weight loss we've been getting from tirzepatide, which is Zepbound. So Wegovy at 7.2 milligrams isn't quite Zepbound across the board, but in the patients who respond well, it's right there. And here's the access piece. Starting July 1st, Medicare's Bridge program adds Wegovy 7.2 to its formulary. That's a meaningful expansion for patients who couldn't afford brand name semaglutide before. Here's why you should care. If you're on standard dose Wegovy and you've plateaued, this matters to you directly. There's a higher rung on the ladder now, and the data says it works. If you're on Zepbound and have been wondering whether Wegovy is just a weaker version or the same thing, the answer is a little more nuanced now. For early responders, the gap is small. For everyone else, Zepbound still pulls ahead on average, but the gap has narrowed. And if you're a Medicare beneficiary who couldn't get GLP-1 coverage before, Bridge adding Wegovy 7.2 in July is genuinely new ground. Here's what you should do. If you're stalled on standard dose Wegovy, ask your prescriber about 7.2 milligrams. Not all patients need it. Some patients are doing fine at lower doses, but if you've been stuck for months and the prescriber is shrugging, this is a real option now. If you're on Medicare, mark July 1st on your calendar and check in with your insurance about Bridge coverage details. And if you're on Zepbound and tempted to switch to Wegovy 7.2 because of the new data, well, slow down. Switching between GLP-1s isn't free of consequences, and we'll talk about that more in the next study. Study 2 is the Surmount Maintain trial. So what to do when you hit your goal. Here's what happened. This is the trial Zepbound patients have been waiting for. The question, once you've lost the weight, can you drop the dose and hold on to your results? So Lilly ran a trial called Surmount Maintain. They took 378 patients who had already lost weight on their maximum tolerated tirzepatide dose, and then they randomized them 3 ways. One group stayed on the high dose. Another group dropped to 5 milligrams, and then one group switched to placebo, which is the trial design version of just stopping the medication. They followed them out to almost 2 years, and here's what they found. The patients who stayed on the high dose kept their full weight loss, 0 regain. 2 years out, they were still at their lowest weight. The patients who dropped to 5 milligrams regained about 11 pounds on average. So some regained, but they kept a lot of it off, or what they had lost, and they significantly outperformed placebo. The patients who stopped completely regained 14% of their body weight. So that is a cliff. If you started at 200 pounds and went down to 160, stopping the medication would put you back in the 180s within 2 years. Both active treatment arms, high dose and 5 milligram, were published in the Lancet this month. Why should you care? Well, if you're on Zepbound or Mounjaro and you've been told by anyone, including your doctor, that the plan is to stop the medicine once you hit your goal, this study is your data. And here's the most important takeaway from a clinical perspective. 5 milligrams is not a starting dose. It's a maintenance dose. The trial proved that. Patients on 5 milligrams kept the vast majority of their loss for 2 years. This matters because a lot of physicians are still thinking about GLP-1 doses as a ladder that you climb to lose weight and then climb back down to come off the drug. That mental model, while I personally practice it quite a bit, may not be entirely the case. The doses are not necessarily steps in and out of treatment. They're different levels of pharmacological effect, and any one of them can be a maintenance dose if it happens to hold your individual weight. So what should you do? If you hit your goal weight on tirzepatide and your physician suggests stopping, ask about dropping the dose instead. 5 milligrams is a legitimate maintenance dose option for a lot of patients. Whatever number on your pen holds your weight steady is the right number. Not the lowest one, not the highest one, the one that works for your body. And that could be 5. It might be 10, it might be 15. Whatever it is, that's your maintenance dose and you should stay there. It's different for everybody. And if your physician isn't comfortable navigating maintenance dosing, that's worth knowing. Not all of us were trained on this. In fact, very few were. It's worth seeking out someone who has done it before. Study 3 is the Attain-Maintain trial. That's switching from an injection to a pill. So here's what happened. Same maintenance question, different drug. Lilly also ran a trial, and this case, Attain-Maintain, which asked, can you transition off an injectable GLP-1 and onto an oral pill? The oral pill in this case is orforglipron. That's the molecule that just got branded as Foundayo. It's a once daily tablet, no injection. So the trial took 376 patients who had already lost weight on injectable Wegovy or Zepbound and switched them to oral Foundayo. Same drug, same dose, regardless of which injection they came off of. Then they followed them for 52 weeks. The result depends entirely on which injectable you came from. So patients who switched from Wegovy to Foundayo kept about 79% of their weight loss at 1 year. On average, they regained about 2 pounds. That's a successful transition in my book. But patients who switched from Zepbound to Foundayo kept about 75% of their weight loss. They regained about 11 pounds on average. So still significantly better than placebo, but noticeably more regained than the Wegovy group. Here's why you should care. If you're on an injectable GLP-1 and you've been thinking about transitioning to an oral, this data tells you what to expect. And the expectation depends on which one you're transitioning from. The biology behind the difference is straightforward. Wegovy is a single target drug. It hits GLP-1 full stop. Foundayo is also a single target drug. It hits GLP-1 full stop. So going from Wegovy to Foundayo is what we would call a lateral move. Same mechanism, different delivery. The body barely notices in this case, but Zepbound's different. Zepbound's a dual target drug. It hits the GLP-1 receptor and a second receptor that's called the GIP. That second receptor does a lot of work for you. So when you switch from a dual target injection to a single target pill, you lose that second mechanism and the scale shows it and you notice it. That doesn't mean Foundayo is a bad drug. It's a great drug. At least that's what the data says so far. It just isn't a one-to-one replacement for tirzepatide. It is more so a one-to-one replacement for semaglutide. So what should you do? Well, if you're on Wegovy and you want off the needle, an oral switch to Mounjaro is a legitimate option. Expect to hold most of your loss. But if you're on Zepbound and you want off the needle, you have 2 real choices. You can switch to an oral and expect some regain, or stay on the injection and keep what you have. Either is defensible, but you should know the trade-off going in. Now, what I will say as a quick aside here, and this is the sort of thing that a trial is not going to show you, because it just doesn't have the resolution. If you're on a lower dose of Zepbound, 2.5, 5, 7.5, and you're a hyper responder, you've gotten to goal weight, well, that's a more realistic path likely to a transition to Foundayo still with success. Where you're going to see problems are patients who've gotten to goal up at a 10, 12.5, or 15 milligram Zepbound dose. If you're in that group, Foundeo is not going to be a good option for you. And then, what I would say overall, don't make this decision alone. The mechanism mismatch is something a physician familiar with GLP-1 pharmacology should be walking you through. So not a refill request you click through on a portal. Let's move on to study 4, wilding. So what's actually happening in the real world? This one's a different kind of study. The first 3 were clinical trials, very controlled circumstances where patients are followed very closely, get their medication reliably, and have a structured experience. This study is what we call real-world data, what actually happens out in the wild. John Wilding and his team at the University of Liverpool pulled the records of almost 90,000 patients in the United Kingdom and Europe who had started a GLP-1 medication, semaglutide, tirzepatide, or liraglutide. Here's the number that got everyone's attention. About half of those patients had discontinued their medication within 1 year. They had what the study calls a 60-day gap or longer. And the patients who quit lost less weight. That part is not surprising, but the part that should make every clinician pay attention is what came next. The patient who lost more weight had significantly lower rates of osteoarthritis, chronic kidney disease, sleep apnea, and heart failure over the follow-up period. The metabolic and cardiovascular benefits of these drugs are dose-dependent and time-dependent. The longer you stay on, the more benefit you get. The earlier you quit, the less you get. So let's talk about why we should care about this. So this is the most important study of the 5 for one reason, in my view. It explains why your friend who's been on Ozempic for 2 years lost 100 pounds, and you, who's been on Ozempic for 4 months has lost, 15 or 20 pounds. The answer is usually time, not dose, not genetics, not metabolism. Time on the drug and also consistency of effort on your part. Half of patients walk away before they get the full benefit. Some of them quit because of costs, some quit because of side effects that nobody really prepared them for, and some quit because their pharmacy ran out of supply. And some, frankly, quit because their physician told them to take a break, which is medical advice that has no evidence behind it for obesity treatment. Obesity is a chronic disease. We treat it the way we treat high blood pressure or type 2 diabetes, chronically. Don't take a break from your blood pressure medication once your numbers look good. You stay on it because the disease is still there and the medication is doing the work. So what should you do? Well, if you're on a GLP-1 right now, and the single most important predictor of your long-term outcome is whether you stay on the medicine. That is more important than which medicine, which dose, which brand, et cetera, et cetera. So staying on it is the king variable. If you're considering stopping, talk to a physician who understands obesity medicine before you do it. Not the friend of a friend, not Reddit, a real experienced clinician. And if you're having side effects that are making it hard to stay on, those are usually manageable. Don't quit silently. There are options for nausea, for constipation, for early treatment phase, GI rough patch. These strategies work. Let's talk study 5. Viking VK2735, the oral pill that's coming. So last study here, this is the one that's really forward-looking and pretty interesting and exciting. It's not approved yet, not on the market, but the phase 2 data presented at ECO is the kind of data that gets investors and clinicians paying attention and excited. Viking Therapeutics presented phase 2 results from a trial called Venture 2. The drug is called VK2735. It's a once-daily oral tablet, and it hits both GLP-1 and GIP receptors. So same dual target mechanism as tirzepatide, but you swallow it, no injection. So this is kind of the flip side of the coin, like we were talking about earlier with Foundeo being just a GLP-1 receptor agonist. VK2735 is a dual. At the top dose, patients lost 12.2% of their body weight in just 13 weeks. That works out to about 26 pounds in 3 months. More importantly, 80% of patients on the top dose had at least 10% weight loss. That's the kind of responder rates we see with injectable tirzepatide from a pill. And the weight loss didn't plateau. So patients were still losing at week 13 at the end of the study, where they, would have ended up at 6 months or a year. Nobody knows yet because the trial was only 13 weeks. Phase 3 starts later this year, and that's where we're going to find out. So why should you care? If this phase 2 signal holds up in phase 3, we're looking at the first oral medication that genuinely competes with injectable GLP-1s. Not as a stepping stone, not as a potential maintenance option, but as a primary treatment from the start. That matters for a few reasons. First, a lot of patients hate needles. An oral dual agonist with injectable level efficacy is a meaningful patient experience upgrade. Second, the manufacturing and distribution of oral pills is a lot easier than injectables. Supply problems, which we've had with injectable GLP-1s for years, in spite of what Lilly and Novo may claim, would likely be less severe. Third, an oral version creates real price pressures on the injectable market. Here's what you should do. Nothing yet. This is forward-looking. It's not actionable right now. Phase 3 takes 1 to 2 years. FDA review takes another 6 to 12 months. So realistically, this drug is not on pharmacy shelves until late 2027 or 2028 at the earliest. And that's if everything goes well, which it rarely does in these sort of things. But if you're on the fence about starting an injectable today because you don't want to commit to needles forever, it's worth knowing that the pill landscape is going to look very different in 2 or 3 years. In the meantime, don't wait. Untreated obesity over the next 2 years does more damage than starting an injectable today and switching to a pill in 2028 when a better option may arrive. So there you go. 5 studies. And here's the through line. Wegovy is getting stronger. Maintenance has finally been studied, and switching between drugs has consequences that depend on the mechanism. Half of patients are quitting before they get the benefit, and the oral pill era is coming faster than most clinicians realize. If you take one thing away from this episode, take this. The most important question in GLP-1 treatment is not which drug you're on. It's whether you're going to stay on it long enough for it to work. Everything else is downstream of that. If you want help with any of this, grab a free consultation at barrickhealth.com. If you want the full reference for everything we just covered and more, the GLP-1 Bible is in pre-order now. I'm Dr. Clete Barrick. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys next week.